The UK is the world's third largest market for video and computer games, generating sales of over £1 billion a year. Fueled by global investment, interactive entertainment is enjoying a worldwide boom. And amid hot debate, computer games are set to enter the classroom. So can teachers turn them into good education, and why should they? Advice comes from those leading the debate worldwide.
First of all, you start with the fact that you don't dismiss games is irrelevant to school. This is a form of cultural activity that's really vitally important to kids, socially and intellectually. And if your first step is to say, get that rubbish out of my classroom, then you've shut down, you've said that what I do in school has no relevance to what you do in the rest of your life, and what you do in the rest of your life has no relevance to what I do in school.
Just as technologies are coming onto the scene that allow for deep learning, conceptual learning, learning how to do and not just talk, we've gone back to a school system that wants you to skill and drill on facts and information out of context. So there's two ships passing each other here, and the schools no longer reflect cutting-edge learning. I offer this as a challenge. Go look at our most recent cutting-edge discoveries about the brain and about how learning works, and ask yourself whether video games reflect those principles of learning or schools do, and you will find out our schools do not. In fact, they readily violate what we know about human learning, and games very often do reflect them.
So is the British education system out of date if it ignores the gaming effect and turns its back on what this powerful technology can offer children?
I like computer games because I think they're fun and they're much better than TV. You can make them do whatever you want. If you've started to get annoyed with James Bond, you can make him jump off a cliff.
I mostly like the two-player games, so I can play him on football and beat him and thing. Yeah.
Well, we like shooting games as well because they're more fun as well.
I would say it was probably more interesting than TV because you're interactive. You are in control of what happens. If you watch like some of these shows on TV, they're always the same every week.
If you see what children are doing outside schools, you realise how little we challenge children in schools. If you see what children are doing when they're playing computer games, when they're working together with each other, when they're working on computer games to overcome all sorts of different challenges, managing cities, racing cars, building cars, working with each other to develop new careers and identities, if you think about The Sims or something. When you look at all of that sort of thing, you realise how few challenges we actually really do give children in schools and how little agency we give them, how little control over their own opportunities, potential and learning.
For supporters of the gaming culture in schools like Kerry Facer, computer games are seen as having the potential to revolutionise the way children learn, as well as giving them the skills to operate in the modern working world. Here in Bristol, that approach is being tested by the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts at the Nesta Future Lab, where research into virtual learning gets put into practice. So is technology the answer to providing an effective education system for the 21st century?
I don't think the technology is actually the key issue in terms of whether schools are out of date or not. The technology is part of it, but it's actually a much bigger set of questions around how we view children. And that's where we are out of date in our education system, because we tend to see children as kind of incomplete beings, children that we need to, they're not finished yet, and we need to let them do something real in about 10 years' time once they've grown up enough. And that's the real way in which our education system is out of date. It's in its views of children.
FutureLab is creating radically different learning environments that challenge children just as games can do. One project currently being tested in 2 schools is Racing Academy. It attempts to motivate children's learning around science and engineering.
The Racing Academy game is a racing game based on real physics, in which success depends on users' ability to change the underlying car setup in order to beat their opponent. To do that, you have to understand the underlying engineering principles that are affecting your race performance.
In this prototype of Racing Academy, what the students are doing is two things. Firstly, using the most advanced physics engine ever made, which simulates any kind of automobile travelling on any surface. The second aspect of the prototype is that the players are involved in a community of users, so that by using message boards and chat rooms which we've provided, they're allowed to communicate over the web to collaborate on engineering and racing activities. Children work together as social networks, where we have some children working as experts and others as apprentices, as novices, learning from the others, gathering expertise and then using that to good practical advantage.
Well, we've had a huge amount of success with it. I mean, it's not to say that there are no problems, but the feedback from both children and teachers who've been involved, a lot of teachers have looked at it and said, please, we'd like this now, because it really does help us teach science and engineering. So it's gone very well, but it's at an early stage. We've made the first 3 levels, and what we're looking at now is what we'd have to do to take it right through to a fully fledged game.
The work being done at Future Lab is only part of the picture. Bristol was also the venue for CAL 2005, the Computer Assisted Learning Conference. A major sponsor was Microsoft, who flew in 2 highly influential American academics, both advocates of the educational value of gaming. Professor Jim Gee is author of a definitive book, What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy. And Dr. Henry Jenkins from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, has also published widely on games and education. They challenge delegates to think again about what engages children.
So it's not about making schools fun. That's the wrong way. It's about making education engaging, which is what education should have been all along, but which games can be used effectively to get to.
The crucial is that we know, even from research in neuroscience, that engagement of that part of the brain that gives affect to things, that is, it says this matters, something's at stake here, pay attention, which is in part the amygdala, but not just the amygdala, means that human beings process information much more deeply than when you don't trigger that part of the brain. And one thing games are certainly very good at doing is triggering that part of the brain, and schools ought to be.
If you ask a kid what's the worst thing about a game, a bad game, they'll say it's too easy. And if you ask the kid what's the worst thing about a bad assignment, and they'll say it's too hard. That tells you the gap right there. That is, for whatever it is, the kids are willing to stay up all night to solve a level in a game and aren't willing to spend an extra 10 minutes to do their homework. Now that should tell you about some gap. Now, parents say, well, it's because it's pleasurable or because it's fun or because it's easy, but it's actually hard work to do these games well. Kids are willing to work hard to beat a game and are not willing to work hard to beat school. That's the fundamental dilemma, the paradox we have to look at and figure out why that is.
Professor Angela McFarlane is no stranger to the debate about computer-assisted learning in schools. A leading expert on the role of digital technologies in education, she sees the push for gaming technology being driven by the users themselves.
Too often in the traditional school curriculum, we give kids the nuts and bolts of the subject area rather than giving them opportunities to discover them for themselves. And that process of discovery is as important and probably more important than any of the content that you're learning along the way. Ultimately, the demand is coming from the kids. You know, children who are using computers at home for writing, for information seeking, for gaming, want to be able to use what they know are very effective tools to support them in their learning in the classroom.
Today, educational products which draw on mainstream game design are beginning to make an impact in the classroom. Parkside Community College in Cambridge is exploring software for use largely in media education.
Is it that one? Yeah. Get ready to switch.
Working within a 3D environment, children can script and animate a drama by devising scenes and character dialogue. This Year 7 class are creating scenes that examine the issue of bullying. Their teacher is James Durran.
Where is Neil? One of the things that we're interested in experimenting with the software is how
it can be used, yes, for teaching about media concepts, but at the same time be very valuable in a cross-curricular way for working in modern languages, in PSHE, a whole range of subjects, even with the software in its really quite early stages as it is at the moment, with very little content provided for different subjects.
This software package is one of a number of products that aim to put powerful and flexible tools for learning in the hands of children. They appear to be engaged and stimulated by the control they exert within its virtual world. On the way, it's hoped that they develop teamwork skills and expand their creative writing range as they produce their first screen drama. At Parkside College, they also plan to use it in Year 8 French and for the GCSE Media Unit. But the rise of video games as a leisure activity and now the entrance of game technology in the classroom is not universally welcomed. How are teachers supposed to keep abreast of the gaming world, let alone use the technology as a learning tool? Deeper fears are expressed around the potential addictive effects of gaming on children. To date, there's been little long-term research in this area. Games often challenge the player for many hours. It's this aspect of their appeal that worries parents most of all. Professor Mark Griffiths has established an international reputation in the area of gambling addictions. He's shown that 1 in 20 children claim they play for 30 hours a week.
There's very little good research that has focused totally on, if you like, true video game addicts. But certainly from the parents that ring me up and the few children I've seen over the last 15 years or so, what you tend to find is that we've got children who basically will not do anything else in their life except play video games. It's really hard to get them to eat, to get them to do any work. And they're dysfunctional children where video games totally take over their life. Now, for most parents out there watching this, they might say we've got children and they're worried and they think their children are playing excessively. But the good news is that excess doesn't always necessarily impact negatively on the children's life. Yes, the parent might want the child to be doing a bit more homework or to be reading a bit more, but the actual empirical evidence suggests that even excessive players, it doesn't seem to be the case that there is a necessarily negative impact on their life.
And there's this really hard bit where there's lots of green people and they're friendly. But as you go around, occasionally one or two of them keep turning into robots and shooting at you, and then you can't...
Even so, parents are still having to learn the often alien language of games and cope with children who take themselves off to play for hours at a time.
It has benefits in the educational side, but it can also change their behaviour and can be quite addictive. I can see why children would stay at these games for so long just to achieve the goals that have been set in the game. Interestingly, this year we gave Dory a game on Christmas Day, and I said to him afterwards, I don't think I'll ever do... Christmas Day should be a family thing, and he disappeared upstairs for the best part of about 3 or 4 hours. And I think next year, if we do buy him a game, we wouldn't give it to him until Boxing Day or after.
And there's a further dilemma for parents. What's been observed in the classroom, that games engage and motivate children, may not receive such a warm response in the home.
I'm very happy for them to play computer games, but I find it very hard to remove them, and at the end of it we saw Richard, he's overexcited, very, very hard to handle. There's something about that flickering screen that just seems to make him very angry. And Edward. Rachel not so much, but it does seem to leave them very angry. So they lose games with cards, they lose games with Monopoly, they get angry, but it doesn't seem to last for as long.
When you're doing something really exciting that the child wants to do and you take it away from them, it's not uncommon for them to have a negative reaction to it. I personally wouldn't be worried with that kind of thing. If a child is literally screaming for half an hour or an hour because they can't play their favourite video game, that might be some indicator that computer game has become very important in that child's life. I think the good news is that all the evidence suggests is that very, very few children really do get to that state where they become totally obsessed with computer games.
Part of the problem is that if you look at the advice literature for parents right now, it by and large advises people to just say no. It by and large it rewards parents for just setting limits. Well, you can play an hour but not 2 hours, or you can't play until you have to do your homework. You can't play in your bedroom, you got to play in the living room. It doesn't provide any guidance about how to have an engaging, creative relationship with media and with your kids. It doesn't teach you to have a constructive way of using media in your children's life. And that's what parents need and what I think needs to be brought forth. We need media literacy education for adults as much as for kids.
The ability to interpret and analyse the media influences around us, media literacy, is gaining attention. The thinking is that if you understand the effects of multimedia in popular culture, you're more likely to be able to protect yourself against any negative influences. This seems to have special relevance when viewing the violent virtual images contained in some games.
Games I'm good at are always better, and violent games, bit of fun. Well, naturally, when you're blowing people up with a large rocket launcher, it doesn't relate to my real world. So, if you're really angry with someone and you don't want to go and hit them, you hit someone on a computer screen. No one gets hurt.
If you look at the empirical evidence on the work that's been done examining the effect of violent video games on children, what you tend to find is that the younger the child is, the more likely there is to be an effect. So for instance, we know from 4 or 5 studies all done in the US that children below the age of 8 years of age, if they play or watch a violent video game, they do in the short term reenact and mimic what they've seen on the screen. Now the problem with that, of course, it's just a short-term effect. It may actually be a function of the way that those particular experiments are carried out. The other problem we have is that there's been no longitudinal research at all following a cohort of children over a long period of time, looking at how much video games they play and their subsequent aggressive behaviour. And we can't control for what we call confounding variables, other things like, the amount of violent films they watch, the amount of violence they see on television, either through entertainment or on the news, or even violence they see in the playground, and you can't really control for that.
The games industry is regulated and there are age guidelines on products, but is there still cause for concern? Jim G. thinks not.
The violence issue is overblown, and I think it's one that is beloved by politicians because it gets a lot of attention. First of all, the best-selling computer game by far is a series of The Sims, which has no violence in it at all. Many, many games are not violent. Second of all, I don't know any rational person that doesn't advocate having controls on games in ways that young people shouldn't be playing adult games, as we do with movies and books and other things. Violence is carried by the culture. It's all about context. So a violent book or a violent video game in the hands of a person who's a disturbed child or in a disturbed culture is a dangerous thing. And we ought to worry about the disturbed culture and the disturbed child.
The language of video games is almost second nature to most British children now. Perhaps it's not surprising then that the next step of designing and building their own games also appeals.
I think it would be good for children to actually make their own games because they're children, so they mostly know what children like. So, because I think sometimes adults, because when they were children, they usually didn't have computer games much, and so they don't know what children really like to do on computer games a lot.
Most of these adventure games, they're very original, but there's nothing more original than the imagination of a small person. If I did have a way of making my own game, I definitely would, because young people today are creative and they could make a really good game, I think.
A team from the Institute of Education agreed. In collaboration with an Oxford-based education software company, they set about devising the Making Games project, which would allow children the chance to author their own game software. In effect, to design and build their own game.
So now you've had time playing with this, how far does it answer some of the things the children wanted in the first iteration?
Well, one of the things that they wanted was more kinds of interactivity.
What we're looking at is how games are made and the elements of games, so children are critical of them, they analyse them, they're aware of the games they're playing. We want to give them experiences that are familiar to them, that they recognise, that the production values are the same as they are in games. A lot of software that children see in schools is very two-dimensional. It's click and play and finish. It's not open-ended. What we're trying to do is provide an open-ended experience that's like the game world, but not a game.
Young game makers start by finding their way around one of 4 virtual environments. The rest is up to them. The environments are a kind of puzzle maze within which they will ask players to compete against the clock, identify and find objects to help them, build characters and overcome obstacles to achieve the end of the game. It's quite a challenge for children who have until now been only game players, not game builders.
Because you build something with it that you then present to another person, and you're building an experience for that other person, you have to think very differently about game making from most other things that you encounter in life. You have to describe precisely how to do things. You have to leave clues everywhere, otherwise your game player will get frustrated. And so the thought processes that you have to employ to develop and create a game are quite unique in actual fact, and can be used, I believe, in a lot of other areas of life.
There are 2 types of object, if you think about this. There are more than 2 types, but just try and divide objects up into 2. What would you think they might be? Exactly. There will be objects which just get in your way. So, I mean, if you want to stop someone getting through a door, you could just put a big chest in the way, okay, which is a kind of challenge.
After a year of work on the Making Games project, the software can be demonstrated in the classroom, and its potential is beginning to emerge.
Making Games fits within a media education model, really. And in media education, we would want children to understand media texts critically, to learn how they're made, what institutions lie behind them, and how they're produced in a modern economy. We'd want them to enjoy them and explore the nature of that enjoyment, just as you might explore the nature of pleasure in reading or watching films, and understand it a bit better. And we'd want them to be able to make them for themselves as perhaps the best way of understanding the structures that lie behind them, but also the creative pleasure that can be obtained from them.
But what do the young game makers think of it all? Pupils from Parkside Community College in Cambridge and Charles Edward Brooks School in South London are taking part in the project.
Because there's a problem with it when they put on the key, it's meant to open this door, but it's not opening, that's the thing. I didn't really understand how much work really goes into making a game until I started doing this. And I realised how difficult it must be and how many years it takes for the software to develop to a certain state of progress.
You could use this software in geography in different environments and different rooms, could be for different countries and different continents with different cultures. It would make geography a lot more interesting than looking at a textbook.
When you click on the safe, I set a rule so that when it's clicked on, it'll open. And then I liked it because you get to choose what sort of game you make, and often you can get bored with games quite easily. But with this game, because you can make it different every time, you get a chance to make it how you want it and how you want to play it and stuff. And they've got a lot of interesting ways to do different things in it, like all the different objects that move and stuff, and just the way you can interact with it. And it's really technical and stuff, and it's quite easy to use once you know it.
It's worthy of study and important that children grow up aware of how it works, of the codes and the conventions that are involved. And I think it's important that children don't just sort of stand back and analyse these things, but actually have opportunities to engage in finding out what it's like to design or even to create games.
So, just as film, TV and literature are given critical analysis within schools, this 3-year project is a step towards understanding games in the same way as a legitimate cultural form. But technology is also taking us out of the classroom. Makers of mobile phones are keen to offer commercial product like games as downloads, but educationalists are just as keen to use mobile technology as a learning tool. The the M-Learning or mobile learning project is being trialled across Europe. It uses games to draw in young people who, for various reasons, have taken no interest in formal learning or dropped out of school. The idea is to offer help with literacy and numeracy, and even foreign language learning. Trials so far have been deemed successful. So what are the implications of game technology and the new world of mobile learning for teachers?
I don't think classrooms are going away. I don't think blackboards are going away. I don't think teachers are losing their jobs. I think how we teach may change. I think that these tools allow good teachers to be even better teachers. I think they create new resources that good schools can use to open up opportunities for their students. We're not talking about displacing teachers with just education in the box. We're saying teachers have a vital role to play, that the learning culture around games is as important as the game itself, that the game is the catalyst which enables and motivates all of these other educational activities to take place.
But in the rush to understand the new gaming culture, we shouldn't forget the part that literacy plays in interpreting the world of multimedia. In the largest ever international study of reading, researchers found that the single most important predictor of academic success in the 37 countries studied was the amount of time pupils spent reading. So how do game supporters square that?
People think that video games are giving rise to the death of reading. And it's not true. It is changing the economy of reading. Kids sit by themselves all alone reading books cover to cover less, but they read and write more than they ever have. They read on chat rooms, they read in the games, they write about the games in the chat rooms and the forums, they read books about their interests when it, like in the mythology, if they're playing Age of Mythology. So reading and writing aren't dying, and as I pointed out earlier, the level of language in Age of Mythology or in Pokemon or in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is far higher than the type of language the kid is seeing at school. So this is not killing reading and writing.
But however it's delivered, new technology will have a vital effect on children's experience. Games are here to stay, along with mobile learning and a host of other technological delights. They may be a nightmare for some and a dream for others, but to serve Britain's children well, those involved in education, it seems, will need to get to grips with whatever the digital future holds in store.